Here is the thing about Chuck Norris that the jokes never captured and the films never quite reached, and that only the complete arc of a life, seen from beginning to end, makes fully visible. He was not special because he was invincible. He was special because he was not invincible, and he showed up anyway, every single morning, for 86 years. The shy boy from Ryan, Oklahoma, who had no father and no direction and no obvious reason to believe he would become anything, found one thing in a Korean dojang in 1958 that organized everything else. The understanding that showing up consistently, doing the work honestly, and refusing to measure your worth by the world's current assessment of it is not a formula for success in the narrow sense of the word. It is a formula for a life. Not a perfect life, not an easy one. Not a life without failure, without loss, without the specific kind of defeat that no martial arts technique can address and no film camera can record. A life with all of those things, with a father who left and a marriage that ended and a friend who died too young and a wife who suffered and a career that peaked and declined and was rebuilt and was never quite what the legend suggested it was. A life that was, in the end, enough. More than enough. A life that mattered to the specific people it touched and to the broader culture it moved through and to the 100,000 children who received the discipline that saved one Oklahoma boy's life, passed forward by the man that boy became. He trained every morning until the morning he couldn't. This is episode 7, The Last Warrior, the last chapter, and the reason the world is quieter today than it was before March 19th, 2026. The final years of Chuck Norris's life are organized around the same things that organized every previous chapter: faith, family, discipline, and the daily practice of showing up to whatever the day requires. He and Gina live on their Texas ranch, a property that reflects the specific values of the man who chose it, not the ostentatious estate of a celebrity whose wealth requires visible confirmation, but a working ranch in the Texas Hill Country, where the land is used and the mornings are early and the life conducted on it is recognizably connected to the American working tradition that Chuck has always identified with more completely than with the Hollywood world that made him famous. The twins, Dakota and Danilee, born in 2001, grow up on the ranch in the specific way that children raised by a man of Chuck Norris's character tend to grow up, with a clear understanding of what is expected of them, with the model of a father whose values and behavior are continuous rather than performed, with the particular confidence that comes from being raised by someone who takes the obligations of parenthood seriously and fulfills them without requiring credit for the fulfillment. Chuck's older sons, Mike and Eric, are adults with their own lives and their own families, and the relationship Chuck maintains with them in these years is the relationship of a father who has come, through the long work of self-examination that a life of faith requires, to an honest accounting of where he was present and where he fell short, and who addresses that accounting not through self-flagellation but through the consistent, ongoing effort to be what his children need him to be in the time that remains. He is present in a way that the career years did not always allow. The ranch is where he is most of the time, and the people on the ranch are the people who have access to him, not the access of fans or media or the entertainment industry, but the daily access of family, of the people whose needs and presences and ordinary companionship constitute the actual texture of a human life when the cameras are not running. Gina's recovery, slow, incremental, measured in better days rather than complete restorations, continues through these years with the patient attention of two people who understand that healing, like discipline, is a daily practice rather than an event. She is not the person she was before the MRI scans. She is a person who has been through something that changed her, and who is living fully inside the life that remains, with the specific resilience of someone whose faith has been tested at the most fundamental level and has held. Chuck tends to her, trains in the mornings, works on his columns and his commentary, manages the KICKSTART program, and lives the ordinary life of a man who has found, in the specific combination of faith and family and the daily discipline that has organized his interior life, since Korea, everything that a life actually requires, He is not performing retirement. He is not managing a legacy. He is simply living in the specific, complete way of a man who has always understood that the living is the point, and that the record the living produces is a consequence rather than a purpose. The morning training ritual deserves its own accounting because it is the one constant that runs from the Korean dojang in 1958 to the Texas ranch in 2026 without interruption. The single thread that connects every phase of a life that passed through more changes than most people encounter across several generations. He trains every morning. Not the training of a man maintaining a public image or preserving a physical capability for professional purposes, but the training of a man for whom the practice of martial arts is as natural and as necessary as the practice of prayer, which is to say, not optional, not contingent on external circumstances, not something that the presence of difficulty excuses him from, and the absence of difficulty makes irrelevant. The specific nature of the training evolves as the body ages. The explosive athletic performance of the competitive years, the tournament fighting, the film work, the demanding physical presence that Walker, Texas Ranger, required 6 days a week for 8 years, gives way to the more measured, more sustainable practice of a man in his 70s and then his 80s, who is not trying to perform for anyone but is maintaining the connection to the discipline that has been the organizing principle of his adult life. He stretches, he works the heavy bag, he practices forms, the kata of Tang Soo Do, the foundational movement patterns that he learned in Osan in 1958 and that carry in their execution the complete history of what martial arts has been for him. Not a fighting system, not a career tool, not a physical fitness program, but a daily ritual of the kind that certain traditions understand as simultaneously physical and spiritual. The body in motion as a form of prayer. The practice of precision as a form of gratitude for the capacity to practice at all. The grandchildren watch him train sometimes. The twins watch him. The people on the ranch watch him. What they see is not the action hero of the films or the television star of the Saturday evenings, but something more fundamental. An old man doing what he has always done, in the specific way he has always done it, because the doing is who he is, rather than what he produces. This is the thing about Chuck Norris that the legend made impossible to see clearly, and that the complete arc of the life makes unmistakable. The discipline was never in service of the career. The career was in service of the discipline. The films and the championships and the television show and the internet fame were the external expressions of an interior practice that preceded all of them and that would have continued in their complete absence. He would have trained every morning if he had never won a tournament. He would have trained every morning if he had never made a film. He would have trained every morning in the complete obscurity of Ryan, Oklahoma, if obscurity had been what the life produced. He trained every morning because that is who he was. Everything else followed. The legacy that Chuck Norris leaves behind exists in 3 distinct registers, and each one serves a different audience and addresses a different need, but all 3, when examined together, point toward the same central truth about what the life was actually for. The first register is the cultural legacy, the films, the television show, the internet phenomenon, the specific presence in the American imagination that a career spanning 6 decades across multiple media and multiple cultural moments can produce. The films are not great art, and Chuck Norris never claimed they were. They are sincere, physical, values-driven entertainment made by a man who understood his audience and respected them, who gave them what they needed rather than what the critics thought they should want, who treated the connection between his work and the people it served as a genuine human relationship rather than a commercial transaction. Missing in action mattered to the people it mattered to in ways that no critical vocabulary of the era was equipped to evaluate, and the measure of that mattering is not the reviews, but the veterans who wrote letters, and the families who watched together, and the specific relief that the films provided to a generation carrying an unresolved national wound. Walker, Texas Ranger, matters to its audience in a way that is still visible 30 years after its premiere, in the reruns that still find viewers, in the streaming numbers that still reflect a loyalty that most television properties of the same era cannot match, in the letters that still arrive and the social media posts that still appear from people who want to say what Cordell Walker meant to them on a specific Saturday night in a specific year when they needed exactly what the show was offering. The internet legend matters in its own specific way, not as cultural commentary or as entertainment, but as a form of affection that the culture developed for a figure whose qualities it recognized and whose specific brand of American toughness and humility it wanted to celebrate in the particular idiom of the age. The jokes are not about Chuck Norris, the man. They are about the archetype he embodied, the quality of character that his public life made visible, the specific combination of capability and modesty that the culture found rare enough to be worth exaggerating into absurdity as a tribute. The second register is the humanitarian legacy, the KICKSTART initiative, the 100,000 children, the measurable outcomes that the discipline of martial arts produced in young lives that needed exactly what it provides. This is the legacy that Chuck himself would identify as the most important, because it is the most direct expression of what he understood his life to have been for. He was saved, not metaphorically, but practically, materially, in the specific terms of a young man whose life had no direction until discipline gave it one, by the practice of martial arts in a Korean training hall in 1958. The obligation he understood himself to carry from that moment forward was not an abstract debt to the universe, but a specific, practical responsibility to pass the thing forward, to ensure that the transformation the discipline produced in him was available to other people who needed it in the same way he needed it. 100,000 children is not a symbolic number. It is 100,000 specific individuals with names and addresses and school records and juvenile justice histories that can be measured before and after their participation in the KICKSTART program, and that show, in aggregate, the specific practical difference that discipline applied early and consistently makes in a young life that might otherwise go in a different direction. This is what the discipline was for. This is what the career funded. This is the most direct line from the boy in the dojang in 1958 to the legacy that outlasts everything else. The third register is the personal legacy, the specific model of character that the complete arc of the life provides for the people who study it. The model is not the legend. The legend is invincible, infallible, immune to the ordinary human conditions of loss and failure and vulnerability. The model is something more useful and more honest, a man who was not naturally gifted, who built everything he achieved through consistent application of discipline, who lost before he won and failed before he succeeded and was hurt before he healed. A man whose faith was not a performance but a daily practice. A man who put the career down when the person he loved needed him more than the career did. A man who laughed at the jokes about himself because he knew who he actually was and did not need the legend to confirm it. That model of discipline applied honestly, of values held consistently, of the refusal to measure your worth by any external standard that fluctuates with the world's current attention, is available to anyone. It does not require talent or physical gifts or the specific circumstances that produced Chuck Norris's career. It requires only the decision to show up every morning and do the work for as long as the morning comes. March 10th, 2026. Chuck Norris turns 86 years old. He posts on social media, as he has done on birthdays in recent years, with the specific directness of a man who has always communicated in plain language without ornamentation. He says he is in good health. He says he is grateful. He says he is thankful for the people who have been part of his life and for the life itself, which has given him more than the boy from Ryan, Oklahoma, had any right to expect when he enlisted in the Air Force 68 years earlier. He does not know it is the last birthday post he will ever write. 9 days later, on the morning of March 19th, Chuck Norris suffers a medical emergency in Hawaii, where he is spending time with family. He is hospitalized. His family gathers. The news, when it breaks to the world, carries the specific shock of the death of someone who seemed because the legend said so, and because the daily training appeared to confirm it, like someone who might simply continue indefinitely. The family's statement is released on March 20th. It is brief and specific and entirely consistent with everything Chuck Norris ever communicated publicly about what mattered to him. He died surrounded by his family. He was at peace. He had lived his life with faith, purpose, and an unwavering commitment to the people he loved. Through his work, his discipline, and his kindness, he had inspired millions around the world and left a lasting impact on countless lives. The response from around the world begins immediately and does not stop. From veterans who watched Missing in Action in theaters in 1984 and who write now about what that film meant to them and what this loss means to them. From elderly viewers who watched Walker, Texas Ranger every Saturday night for 8 years and who feel the loss with the specific personal grief of losing someone who was present in their homes week after week, year after year, in the most intimate way that television allows. From martial artists on every continent who trace their connection to the discipline back, through chains of instruction and inspiration, to the man who brought the World Martial Arts Championship to America in 1967 and built a system of schools that is still operating and still producing champions and still changing lives. From an entire generation of people who know Chuck Norris primarily through the jokes, who learned his name from the internet in 2005 or 2008 or 2012, and who find, in the days following his death, that the man behind the jokes was considerably more interesting and considerably more admirable than the jokes suggested, and who respond to this discovery with the specific emotion of people encountering a legacy they did not know they had. From the KICKSTART children, now adults, many of them, with their own families and their own lives, who may not always know the name of the man who funded the program that changed their trajectory, but whose lives are the most direct and most permanent expression of what the life of Chuck Norris was actually for. Gina's grief is private and total and entirely her own. The man who put everything down to sit beside her and fight for her life is gone. And the space he occupied in the morning, in the kitchen, in the training hall, in the specific daily presence of a partner who has been there every day for nearly 30 years, is now empty in the way that spaces occupied by the irreplaceable become empty. There is no adequate language for this and no adequate response to it except the faith that Chuck lived and that Gina shares, and that does not make grief smaller but makes it bearable. The sons remember the father. The grandchildren remember the grandfather. The people who worked with him remember the professional who treated everyone on the set with the same respect, from the director to the person who brought the coffee. The KICKSTART instructors remember the man who visited the schools himself and corrected technique and asked questions about outcomes because the outcomes were what mattered and the credit was beside the point. Carlos Ray Norris, 1940 to 2026, 86 years, 3 lives, 1 man. The arc complete, the invisible boy first, Ryan, Oklahoma. The dirt road and the wooden house and the father who left and the mother who stayed. The childhood that offered nothing obvious and installed through the patient daily instruction of a woman of extraordinary faith and discipline, everything that actually mattered. The shy, overlooked, directionless boy who found himself in a Korean dojang in 1958 and understood for the first time what the qualities his mother gave him were actually for. The warrior next. The world champion who lost before he won and studied every loss with the honesty that champions require. The friend of Bruce Lee who flew to Rome to lose in the Colosseum and ended up being seen by the world. The action hero who gave a wounded country its pride back on a movie screen and gave a generation of veterans something the government never managed to give them, the simple acknowledgement that they fought well and deserved better. The television star who found the audience Hollywood forgot and held it for 8 seasons with faith and values and the specific authenticity of a man playing a version of himself. The man last, the real man, beneath and behind, and more important than any of it, the caregiver who put the career down without ceremony when Gina needed him, the father who showed up differently in the later years than the earlier ones and understood the difference and addressed it, the KICKSTART founder who passed the discipline forward to 100,000 children because the discipline had saved one boy's life, and the obligation that created was specific and real and not transferable to anyone else. The man who sat at his kitchen table in Texas and laughed at the jokes about himself because he knew exactly who he was, and the knowing was complete. 3 phases, all connected. The poverty produced the discipline produced the champion produced the platform produced the program produced 100,000 lives lived differently because one life was lived right. He trained every morning. He showed up every day. He never stopped being the boy who found in a Korean training hall the understanding that the only person whose assessment of you cannot be taken away is you, and that the assessment is made not in the winning or the losing, but in the daily, unglamorous, uncelebrated practice of doing the work. The last Chuck Norris fact is the truest one. He was not invincible. He was better than that. He was consistent. And in the end, consistency is the only superpower that actually exists. This has been Legends of America. If Chuck Norris's story moved you and if it reminded you that discipline builds what talent alone cannot, that the invisible boy can become anything if he finds the right dojang, that showing up every morning is both the simplest and the hardest thing, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for the next series. The legends continue. This is Legends of America. Thank you for watching.